What's going on, everybody? Welcome to After Prison Show, and in this video we got an awesome interview for you. We're going to be talking with a guy that I first became familiar with while I was in prison by the name of Shaun Attwood. This is a guy who's from the UK, who ended up getting locked up in Arizona because essentially this guy was a pretty big-time drug dealer. This is a man who would end up serving over 6 years in prison for these drug charges, and while in prison, this guy would experience all sorts of crazy stuff. In fact, Shaun's story is so crazy, it was actually featured on an episode of Locked Up Abroad. Shaun has actually been released from prison for quite a few years now, and in the time since he has been released, this man's been doing some pretty remarkable things out here in the free world. And in this interview, we're gonna talk all about what Shaun has been through and what he's been doing since coming home after serving 6 years in prison.
One of the meals in the jail was, we called it Red Death. It looked like carroty vomit blended with blood, and it occasionally had a dead rat in it. You very rarely see a big dude like this just standing up for young people who he didn't even know, risking his life, because some of these rapists could fight, you know. He got his ass whooped a few times. Guys coming at him with river rocks in socks, guys stabbing him.
So Shaun, first thing that I want to say is thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. I've been knowing you since I was incarcerated and I first became familiar with who you were, but you really have an absolutely compelling story that I truly feel a lot of people need to hear about. So if you would you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself and the things that you've been through?
My story in a nutshell, you know, I'm from a little town in the northwest of the UK. Didn't have much money growing up. I got interested in the stock market at a young age. I started trading it when I was 16. So I'm telling all my mates I'm a little town, I'm gonna go to America, make $1 million, fly you guys over. That was my dream. Went on to uni, did a business studies degree, ended up in Arizona. Used to visit my aunts in Arizona as a kid. And coming from the north of England where it's wet and cold and rainy, you know, the plane comes in and you see all the swimming pools in the backyards and they hear the English accent, they roll out the red carpet. So I'm thinking, kind of like it out here, you know, when I graduate, I'm going to move out here. So I ended up, if you've watched Wolf of Wall Street, I became a stockbroker in the beginning. It was a bit like that, glorified telesales. I started out just on my student credit cards. It was commission only. I was almost running out of money. I was worried I was going to have to come home. But pursuing my dream, I ended up grossing about $500,000 a year after 5 years in. I was the top producer in the office. I had no common sense. I had no emotional maturity. The money went right to my head, and I started to throw rave parties for up to 10,000 people at a time with it. And I had dudes bringing like tens of thousands of hits of ecstasy over from Holland. So America was good to me. I didn't even need to be doing the drugs scene because I was worth $2 million in the stock market. But I just went off the rails, and I ended up, you know, throwing these parties. At about 200 people working for me. Got my bouncers running around, armed to the teeth. You know, I'm thinking I'm a character out of some movie like Blow. I'm living in $1 million house on a mountain. And on May 16, 2002, SWAT team smashed my door down. It was time to pay the price.
That's unbelievable right there. Like, just to think that here you are, a man from the UK, you come over to the United States, get into the stock industry, and then from there, you're already worth so much money. You get into the drug scene there because I'm sure the drug scene there was pretty out of control already. But your story, just with what you've told us thus far, I mean, this was actually something that was featured on National Geographic Channel, was it not?
Yeah, it was an episode of Locked Up Abroad on Nat Geo channel. That went out to 40 countries, to tens of million people. I think the premiere in America was to 10 million people.
Wow.
And I got about 1,000 messages in the next few days, and I only got 4 death threats out of that. It was great. They were people who supported the sheriff. The rest of them were really proud of my family support. I was blessed to have such strong family support. And my activism, because, you know, before I went to jail, Joe, I got to admit, I thought prisoners were pedophiles, murderers, rapists, lock them up, throw away the key. Because that's all I'd ever heard in the media was like serial killers and rapists and this stuff. And once I got into prison, And I saw the for-profit warehousing of low-level drug users. It was the biggest house of the mentally ill. It was people with addiction issues, non-violent drug offenders like yourself. All the racism. I saw black guys. I saw Mexican kids getting up to 5 years for joints of weed. I saw a war hero, Vietnam vet. He got shot in the head, Purple Heart. I was there when he got sentenced. Prosecutor said, he's an unemployed black guy with a nice new car. There was some crumbs of cocaine on the carpet. He must be a drug dealer. And judge is like, bam, yeah, gave him something like up to 10 years just for that. So my behavior was selfish, and I was just thinking about getting high, getting my party friends high. I wasn't thinking about the needs of other people. But once I got into jail, I saw the horror of all these vulnerable people just getting abused by the system. And it made me want to expose what was going on, because I said to God, how on earth do you guys get away with all these human rights violations? Cockroaches crawling all over us at nights, guards murdering mentally ill prisoners. Occasionally there was a dead rat in the food. And the guard said to me, the world has got no idea what's really going on in here. And that triggered something in my brain, and I just started to write it all down.
And before we get into all of that, let's talk a little bit about this facility that you were locked up at, because this place that you were at, this was no good of a place at all, was it?
According to National Geographic, who researched it for my episode, they found out that 62 people died in that jail around the time I was there over a 5-year period. And it's the jail with the highest rate of death out of all jails and prisons in America. And some of those people were mentally ill people murdered by the guards. One was a blind guy. He was in for shoplifting, partially blind, Brian Crenshaw. And he failed to produce his ID for the chow in the evening. And the guards pulverized him, broke his neck, severe internal injuries. He went into a coma. He died over a month later. Scott Norberg, mentally ill man wandering a neighborhood. They brought him in. The guards started to beat him up and electrocute him with taser guns. Female guard tried to stop it. She goes, stop beating him. His face has turned blue. They pushed her off. They kept beating him. The prisoners watching from the holding cell started to yell, why are you still beating him? He's already dead. And even after that, they continued to beat the corpse, turn blue and everything. Both of those cases were caught on camera. Family members sued the jail, got compensation. A question for you, Joe. What do you think the boss of the jail, Sheriff Arpaio, did to those guards who were found responsible in federal court for murdering those prisoners?
Probably absolutely nothing.
Well, you're going in the right direction. He gave some of them promotions.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So here you are, this guy from the UK who probably hasn't even been in the United States all that long, and now you're locked up in this jail seeing all of this crazy stuff going on around you. I mean, what are you thinking during this time?
Okay, I came to America, Joe, actually, back after I graduated uni, which was 1991.
Oh, okay.
And the SWAT team came in 2002. So, I did know a lot of people out there, and that's what saved my ass in the jail, really, because it was all completely racially gang controlled. And as soon as I went in, some skinheads from the neo-Nazi Aryan Brotherhood come up to me, and they're like, get in that cell, we want to have a word with you. And you can't say no to these guys. So they closed the door behind me, and I'm naive to prison etiquette, so I just made the situation worse. They were like, what are your charges? What are your charges? My charges were a little printout, but I don't understand what it means. It's all legal terminology. So I say, I'm not sure what my charges mean. And they were like, what do you mean you don't know what your charges mean? Are you chomo? You chomo? I don't know what chomo is either at this point. They've got me up against the wall about to smash me. In the end, I pulled out my charge sheet. They saw I was in for drugs. They saw my bond was $750,000 cash only.
Oh my God!
They were like, God damn, dog, who did you kill? You guys the mafia or what? And then they left me alone after that.
You're seeing guard brutality. You're seeing these gangs that are approaching you. You're probably seeing all sorts of other gang violence taking place while you're in this facility. Like, you want to expose this. So how exactly do you go about trying to convey this?
All right, so this was in my second year in the remand jail now. My first year, I did in medium security. My second year I did in maximum security. And it was in maximum security, I asked the guard, how'd you get away with all this? Blogs were just starting out back then. It wasn't really in the news or anything. My dad had read a blog about a guy in Baghdad called Salem Pax, the Baghdad blogger. And he started blogging about when the bombs were all falling on Baghdad, and that was getting in the news. So me and my dad discussed it, and we were like, all right, maybe we could use a blog. But my mom, she knew about the guards murdering these prisoners, and she didn't want me to do it because of, retribution from the guards. So in the end, we decided to not put anything in my name. We put it as John's Jail Journal, Jon. And how on earth did I do this in maximum security? I was allowed a tiny little golf pencil, and I sharpened it on the door, and I wrote everything down. I thought, if I put this in the mail, the guards can open your mail sometimes for security purposes. So I recruited my aunt. She'd visit me on the weekends. Now, in maximum security, you're not sat at a table, like you can pass things. There's a plexiglass window. And what I did was I hid what I wrote in stuff that I could release to my aunt through the visitation guards. I'd get like a property release form signed off.
Right.
And then I'd have like legal paperwork, old books, old letters. I hid what I wrote in that kind of stuff. So the first time I did this, I went to the visitation room, and my heart's going like crazy. I'm thinking the guard's gonna find this. I'm exposing the jail. They're gonna be mad, and they're gonna put me in a cellie in with me who's gonna want to kill me or rape me or something, or they're gonna take me to a blind spot and beat me up. So I'm watching it on his table for the whole time I'm at the visit, like looking at the corner of my eye. And then at the end of the visit, my aunt says goodbye, and she gets up. The guard went down the corridor, gave her the stuff. She went home, typed these things up, emailed them to my parents, who live in the northwest of England, in between Liverpool and Manchester. And that's how the blog, John's Jail Journal, started. I thought no one would read it. I thought maybe my family and friends. But the BBC ran it, the Guardian ran it, and it snowballed. And, it's still going strong to this day.
Real quick, I want to throw this in here as well. It was when I was incarcerated that I came across John's Jail Journal. I was hearing about this over the phone. I didn't have access to see this for myself, but I was having these entries read to me. And while I'm hearing this, I'm thinking to myself, this was actually a big inspiration for why I began Joe Rights His Wrongs, the blog that I had created. And actually, you even featured a story that I had written while I was locked up about this insane drug test situation that happened in the jail.
Yeah, when I read that story you sent me, Joe, I was thinking, this guy's got serious storytelling and writing skills. Your level of detail, you took us right there with you during this P test. We all go through this in prison. I was a drug offender, so I'm on the hot list too. And you got to get your out, and the guard's just staring at you. I don't know if you had the expression. We had an expression where we was at called Peter gazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the guard is just Peter gazing, and you've got to psych yourself up to get this pee out, and it's not exactly the easiest.
I tried to spark up a conversation with this guy as I was going through this. I'm like, hey, how about that weather? He's like, don't talk to me, just take the test. I said, man, I'm not even going to be able to do this right now. I need about 5 minutes. I'll get back with you. So let's talk about what ends up happening in your situation while locked up. Talk about how much time you end up getting and then actually getting released.
Okay, I was the last man standing in my case. I fought my case for 26 months. And the bottom line is, Joe, it's a sad reflection of the US justice system, but it worked to my advantage. Your sentence is, the bottom line is, how much money you've got and who your lawyer is. And in the end, my parents come up with $100,000 to get Alan Simpson. And after 26 months, he got me a plea bargain for 9.5 years. He was a loophole lawyer who'd been recommended to me by my associates in the New Mexican Mafia, because before I got arrested in the drugs business, as I rose up the ranks, I developed an association with the New Mexican Mafia. I also had Sammy the Bull Gravano. He was my competition in the ecstasy market. I was bumping heads with him. So they said to me, if you ever get busted, don't speak to the cops. Get Alan Simpson. He's a loophole lawyer. And that's what we did. I had money in people's names. I'd flown over from the UK. I thought I wasn't going to have to hit my parents up. And, it was one of the most humiliating, embarrassing situations of my life was the police put a virus in my computer, took all that money when I was arrested, and I had to make that call from the jail and ask my parents for all that money to help me get out. Otherwise, I'd still probably be inside right now. And, it still makes me sick to this day to see the hurt and pain that I caused on my parents, see that hurt and pain on their faces.
That's something that you don't even think about until after the fact. Once, basically all the cards have fallen, the people who get affected by the mistakes that we make and also the burden that we end up putting on them when, that's never the intention when you're wrapped up in that type of a lifestyle.
Yeah. So, they see that I'm doing the talks in the schools now. They see the reactions from the kids. And, hopefully that's going to make them proud of me again.
And that's another thing that I want to bring up is, after you're released, you begin to do so many amazing things. You've got John's Jail Journal, the blog going on. You end up getting featured on Locked Up Abroad. Can you talk a little bit about how that actually came about?
So I served just under 6 years total. When I was getting released, some of the prisoners I was writing about, they approached me. Because they were getting pen pals, they were getting books sent to them through the blog. And they were like, Shaun, you're going to keep the blog going for us and stuff? Because I think you've touched on this before. Prisoners, when they get released, because so many of them have addiction issues, they promise their friends everything in the world. I'm going to write to you, I'm going to send you some money, I'm going to send you some books. And then you don't hear from them until 6 months later when they're rearrested for drugs. So
absolutely,
a community had built up in prison around the blog, certain prisoners I was writing about. And, you later on, if you want to hear some shocking stories, some of these guys have got some really shocking stories I could tell you. So I promised them I would keep the blog going, got out, kept the blog going. And the company that makes the documentary for National Geographic Company is actually a company out of London. And I contacted them and, they were aware of my activism in the blog and stuff like that. But they said because Locked Up Abroad is mostly watched in America, and I was in prison in America, I'm not abroad. So they couldn't include me. So what I did was, over the years, because so many prisoners were getting in touch with me to have, because of the blog and stuff, over the years, I sent them other prisoners to feature as part of the Locked Up Abroad series. Yeah, so
wow.
And it was about 5 years later from when I originally contacted them. They contacted me and they said, Shaun, we've just had this thing now where National Geographic have changed it now so we can include a couple of stories out of America. And because you've helped us over the years, you were at the top of the list of the people we were going to contact. And do you still want us to have your story? And I was like, yeah.
That's a major accomplishment right there to get featured on something on National Geographic.
Well, it was good karma, wasn't it? Because, when they said no to me, I could have just got pissed off and I could have just let it lie. But I thought, I'm going to try and build a relationship with these people. Who knows what might happen? And down the road, it paid off.
Man, that's awesome. Let's also talk about some of the speaking engagements that you do as well, because I see you on Facebook. I see you're all over the place talking to these young people, and that's really impressive. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Joe, when I was running around with my party friends, I didn't see the harm drugs cause society. I just thought I was keeping the party going, getting everybody high. I was Mr. Cool Guy. And then once I got into jail, and I saw 90% of the prisoners shooting up heroin and crystal meth where I was housed, 2/3 hepatitis C from sharing dirty needles, yellow jaundice skin, teeth rotting out. Those guys were near the end of that road of drug use. And some of them, they said to them, to get the treatment, they had to sue basically. So only so many of them were offered the treatment, interfere on $30,000 a year. To treat them all would bankrupt the system. So they don't treat them all. And then they said to the ones who'd got the treatment, to get the treatment now, you've got to get off the drugs. And some of those guys were choosing to stay on the drugs and not get the treatment and die from their livers getting eaten up from this hepatitis C. And I thought to myself, I put people on that road of drug use, and it made me ashamed. I didn't understand how long that road was and the horror of what came at you at the end. And I knew I couldn't change my past, so I just resolved to go out and share my story with young people. You know, it's the same thing like what you're doing now, Joe. These young people, you keep it real on your channel, and you have a lot of crazy, interesting stories, but they can sure see the horror of what these, if you get busted for drugs, of what that can lead to.
So when you go into these speaking engagements, can we talk about how that first came about for you?
Yeah, what happened was I was wondering how this opportunity would come about, and it came out quite lucky for me because when I got deported back to the UK, I did a BBC interview, and I was talking about like the cockroaches and the gangs and all that kind of stuff, the chow. And this guy who was a addiction counselor who also sends people into schools to do talks that help young people with drugs and alcohol, stuff like that. He heard the interview. He contacted the BBC and he said, look, Shaun, I've got this business and I'd like to help you get employment by sending you out to these schools to do these talks. And I said, yeah, that's cool, because I was worried about employment, having a criminal record. But I said to him, I need to get my head straight because I'm coming out of prison after 6 years, I'm a bit institutionalized. And my mom said I was like a puppy dog falling around the house, just waiting for the orders for the first 6 months. So it took me a year and a half before I got my head straight enough to take this guy up on his offer. And then I started out, first school I spoke at, I was so nervous, I couldn't even eat my breakfast. I went and looked at these teenagers, and I was more scared of these teenagers than some of these murderers and gangsters I've been associating with previously. I paced like a prisoner in a cell for the entire hour at the front of the room, soaked in sweat, all this raw energy just coming off me. And I got out of there, Joe, and I called my mom and I said, here's what happened. They must have thought I was a lunatic. I don't think I'm cut out for public speaking. Now, I'm getting depressed then because I'm on the dole. That means you're unemployed in this country, can't get a job, criminal record. And a few weeks later, I got an email from the school. They said they got a professional public speaker in every week. The kids voted the talk I did as one of the best, and they would like me to come back. And that got my confidence up.
Absolutely.
Once I got my confidence up, other schools started telling other schools, and it's at the point now where I'm doing over 100 talks a year.
That is unbelievable.
Thanks.
And what is the reaction from these kids? Do you get a really positive reaction when you tell your story to them?
Okay, I do a range of schools from some of the inner city areas, where there's a lot of gang problems, up to the most expensive independent schools in the country, like Stowe School. And drugs just affects absolutely every section of society. So in some of the inner city schools where there's the gang members, they're looking at me like, who is this guy? What's he going to tell us? That kind of thing. Because whenever the teachers say someone's coming in to speak about drugs, the kids, they get ready to play on their phones and they get ready to zone out because they think some guy's going to say, drugs are bad for you, blah, blah, blah. This is what drugs does to your brain. And I start out just saying, look, hey, I'm here to tell my story. And I give a little backstory about my school days and how, I made money in the stock market and stuff. Once I get into the jail conditions,
they're hooked.
They're on the edge of their seats. Yeah. And then by the end of it, the teachers tell me the kids who stay behind asking me the most questions are the hardest to reach students. Yeah. So on my Twitter, it's just all on my Twitter likes. It's all live feedback coming in from the kids. And I even get parents sometimes requesting to meet me. And they say stuff like, we were lucky if we get a grunt out of our son when he comes home from school. After your talk, he wouldn't shut up about it. And it was the first time we sat down and we talked to our kid about drugs. One kid, she was so inspired, she went on to do a degree in criminology. And I met her parents, had a meal with them and everything. And they're possibly going to fly out to Arizona and visit one of the guys I was in prison with, this big guy called T-Bone, who was using his fighting skills as a Marine to stop prison rape.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I remember just recently reading about this. And the crazy thing about that story right there involving T-Bone, you had that featured with Vice, I do believe.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about T-Bone's story and what he was actually doing in the jails? Because, I mean, it was pretty unbelievable when I was reading it myself.
Yeah, because of the rules of racial division, there can be tension when white dudes make friends with black dudes. And when I first saw him walking across the yard, his biceps are bigger than my head. Some of the prisoners call him John Coffey after that character in The Green Mile. That's how big he is.
Jesus.
Yeah, so because of the rules of racial division, naturally I wouldn't have approached a guy like this. But some of the prisoners were finding out that I was writing, and my blog was getting pen pals for prisoners and stuff like that. So one night I'm just in my cell, just writing up my little stool desk combination, and this figure just appears at my door, just completely blocking all the light out. This guy's so big.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, oh shit, what's this guy want? But he came in and he was really nice. He was really educated. He talked about English history and military history, like the Romans and all this kind of stuff. And we had good chemistry. And one thing I did notice was, a lot of people talk the talk in prison, saying what big stories and what big gangsters they are and all the things they've done. This guy had his entire body was covered in scars. Not tiny little scars, like horseshoe-sized scars. So that got me thinking, this guy's for real. And I started asking him about each of his scars. And each scar just had an amazing life and death prison fight story behind it, or US Marine story behind it.
Wow.
And that made me then just want to really start putting this guy's stories out there on the internet. Prison is such a cutthroat environment. You very rarely see a big dude like this just standing up for young people who he didn't even know, risking his life. Because some of these rapists could fight, He got his ass whooped a few times. Guys coming at him with river rocks in socks, guys stabbing him and stuff like that. But he was deeply religious. And he said, as a US Marine and as a Christian, he felt he was divined to use his skills for God to stop the raping of the young people, because that was the foulest thing anyone could do. And even though he almost died a few times, he felt that he wasn't going to die because God had his back. So, to stand up for these young people in this cutthroat environment shows this guy's got the biggest heart I've ever seen.
And that's what he was doing, correct? He was standing up for the weaker prisoners and even prisoners who had some pretty crazy charges, right?
Yeah, and prisoners would say, you think you're a cop, you think you're a guard, you shouldn't be doing this, and they'd attack him and stuff like that. So he was constantly in having battles with people.
Wow. Is he still in prison now?
He's back inside now. They tried to give him a 200-year sentence. What happened was, with T-Bone, he's institutionalized. When he got out of the Marines, he set himself up as a bodyguard. He was making up to $1,000 a day. He invested it into cocaine. So he's got addiction issues and he's institutionalized deeply. When he got released, he's been in and out a few times over the years. When he got released about 4 or 5 years ago, I was on Skype with him every week, trying to get his life story down as a book, because I thought that would give him credibility to do talks and stuff like that. It would help him get back on track in life. But I knew I was in a race against time, because Arizona is one of the most racist states, and they just want to put him. They tried to put him back inside for life because he's black, because he's got criminal history, because he's considered so dangerous because of his fighting skills as a Marine. And they said to him, "Look, you've done this robbery. If you go to trial and lose, we're going to give you 200 years." And he says, "No, I've not done the robbery. I'm going to pray. I'm going to take this to trial." And for a black guy to win at trial in Arizona is unheard of. So he went to trial, and they said to the prosecutor, they said, they said to the detective, "You said he did this robbery. There was a camera in the place. Where's the video of him doing the robbery?" And the policeman said, "We didn't have time to get the video. There was one witness saying he'd done the robbery." And they said to the policeman on the stand, they said, "Your one witness is a known liar and she lies on the stand." And the police said, "Yeah, we know she lies on the stand." So the jury kicked it out. He didn't get the 200 years, but they found him guilty of another charge. They said he'd stole $20 off a countertop in a store. And because of his priors, they gave him 13 years for that.
13 years for stealing $20 off of a countertop.
And he's saying he didn't do it, and he's appealing it.
Unbelievable.
That's Arizona for you.
And you actually feature T-Bone stories on your blog?
Yeah. I featured a range of characters on my blog, from mafia hitmen like Two Tonys. He was doing 141 years. Where I was at, there was a hierarchy amongst the murderers. Because he was old school Italian mafia, you don't murder women and kids. He'd only murdered rival gangsters. He was near the top of the respect in the prison where I was at. He asked me to write his life story. And he said, he was telling his friends I was his official biographer. So when people came to pay respect to him, it kind of rubbed off on me. And once he took me under his wing, I never got attacked again after that, because I did get in a few situations before that. They range also to a transgender prisoner called Zena, who was 6.5 foot.
Wow.
And the most shocking prison stories I ever tell are Zena's stories.
Look, Shaun, before we go any further, I definitely got to plug John's jail journal for everybody watching this. Definitely go check out John's jail journal. I'm going to include links for everything that Shaun's doing with this video. But Shaun, you have definitely got to start telling your prison stories. I know you have your YouTube channel. There would be people who would be tuned in to definitely see some of these crazy stories that you could tell about T-Bone, Zena, scuffles that you have been in yourself. I just know you got some crazy stories to tell.
Yeah, it's endless. I mean, my life story is a trilogy. And as audiobooks, it's 30 hours long, just the audiobooks alone. And I even have more stories than that.
These are in books that you've already published?
Yeah, my life story is Party Time, all the crazy stuff I did that led to the SWAT team coming, all the raves and the ecstasy dealing. Hard Time is my time in the remand jail, unsentenced for 26 months. And then Prison Time is my time in Arizona Department of Corrections.
Unbelievable. I'm going to include links for how people can find this with this video as well. If anybody wants to read these books, I would highly encourage that you do so, because again, for as long as I've been knowing you, Shaun, everything that I see from you, whether it's the speaking engagements, whether it's the National Geographic show Locked Up Abroad, whether it's the books I remember seeing about the books while I was locked up, your story is just absolutely compelling, to say the least.
Oh, I appreciate that, Joe. Thank you for your support.
With everything that you have been through, Shaun, let's talk about when you got released from prison. And I know you mentioned how it took you over 1.5 years to readjust back into society, but what do you feel was the number one thing that you were struggling with after being released?
All right, well, I'll go back to my release briefly then. Have you watched that movie Con Air?
Absolutely.
If you're getting deported, like I was, I ended up on Con Air for 2 days first off, so it wasn't a straight release. In Arizona, if you're getting released from Arizona Department of Corrections, they give you $50. It's called gate money, and they say, have a nice day. In my case, I had to go to a deportation prison, federal, and then they wouldn't tell me my release back to the UK for security purposes. And then one day they told me to roll up after being at deportation for several weeks. And I end up on Con Air, where on Con Air, all the prisoners are chained and shackled, and federal marshals are guarding you. You can't get up, use the toilet, anything like that. Because it was deportation, I was the only British guy. It was me and all Mexicans. And because I spoke a bit of Spanish, I was able to translate for the Mexicans to the guards and stuff like that. Made myself useful. So after 2 days of doing Con Air across Arizona and California, they put me on a regular flight from LA. They're like, all right, well, we'll put you on first so you don't scare the passengers. We'll take your cuffs off. Don't try anything funny. I go up the stairs without my cuffs. There's a cabin crew from London. It was the first time anyone spoke to me like I wasn't an animal or a number. To hear people speaking to me normally, I was just blown away that these people just came across as just so nice. And then I got on the plane, and then, I've been around sweaty, hairy men in the desert for 6 years. So the women are getting on. I could smell the perfume. I could smell all these things. And I'm thinking, I've been in prison transportation for days right now. I'm stinking. I got to get a bird bath. So I started to get paranoid. I'd been awake for days as well. And my first mistake was, because I was institutionalized, I was so used to having to ask permission for everything. I put my hand up and I asked a female member of the cabin crew permission for me to use the toilet. And she's like, you don't need to ask, the toilet's right there. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And I got up, I went, and, I had a bird bath, got back on. The flight to London takes like 10 hours plus.
Wow.
But I was just so excited. I still couldn't sleep. My mum, dad, my sister, everyone's at the airport. My mum's crying and stuff, and I'm giving them big hugs. And yeah, man, it was just so happy to be able to give my mum a hug in the free world. And they took me for Indian food right away, my favorite. I got the gag reflex. One of the meals in the jail we called it Red Death. It looked like carroty vomit blended with blood, and it occasionally had a dead rat in it. We gave a rat back to the guards one time. We complained. They came back, and so jail won't get any trouble. They said it was just a potato. So
this dead rat, it's not a dead rat. It's a potato. You're not seeing this correctly.
Some of the prisoners managed to sneak out of the jail the boxes chow was coming in that said not fit for human consumption. And they gave those packages to the lawyers that were suing the jail. So I did that interview, like you mentioned, the BBC interview that led to me doing the schools talks. And I go back to my hometown, and throughout my 6 years in the incarceration, they had me on and off meds because sometimes I just got so depressed, and my anxiety was so high. I was on the verge of stuff at one point when they told me I was facing up to a 200-year maximum sentence at one point. So I got off the meds, and I told the mental health people in my town these meds were necessary for prison because it's such a crazy place. And they said, well, when you think you're not crazy anymore, that means you're having grandiosity, and we want to double your medication. So the mental health team were all like threatening to do house visits and section me. Section you means they think you're so crazy they're gonna like put you away into some kind of institution for the mentally insane. I couldn't get a job, criminal record. The people in the UK, it's called being on the dole is unemployed. So the people that work at the dole office, they were saying whenever you go for a job interview, we want you to lie. We want you to not tell them you've been in prison. Otherwise, you're just never going to get a job. I had an agent who was going to get me a job as an author. She got diagnosed tragically with ovarian cancer. She got sent home to her parents. She had so many months to live, and she just died. So for my first year, I'm struggling to fit into society. But then, I had a best buddy out of America who was actually my former ecstasy supplier. He was an Englishman, and he did time in the feds for mailing drugs across state lines, and he got released a few years before me, and he ended up with a house in the London area. Now, in the UK, London is like the center of economic opportunities. There's a lot more work available. Up by Liverpool and Manchester, it's about 4 or 5 hours drive. Traditionally, it's been more economically depressed up there. So once I moved south into my buddy's house, and I started to contact people in London about the books and the talks and stuff like that, that's what helped me then get focused, get the work opportunities going, and get me focused and get back to work.
Again, it's just absolutely unbelievable everything that you've gone through and been able to just completely do a 180 in your life, turning all of this negativity into a positive. With that, what do you feel is your biggest goal right now, something that you haven't achieved and are still trying to achieve?
You know what? When I was a teenager, I set a goal of making $1 million in the stock market, and I achieved that by age 30. And now, my attitude now is just to go with the flow. I get all these responses from the kids. I get emails to people all over the world reading my books. And it just feels good to just keep going in that direction to restore my karma from the harm that I caused to society. Perhaps my biggest goals are in the books. I just started my own publishing company. I got books out about Pablo Escobar, making a murder, and all that kind of stuff on Netflix. And they've been really taking off on Amazon.
Wow.
So yeah, and I'm also looking for other people who've got big true crime stories, maybe publish their books as well. I did reach out to Pablo Escobar's son. He's got a second book coming out about his dad's involvement with the CIA. and the normal publishers won't touch that because it goes against, what people are supposed to believe about the war on drugs.
Right.
So, my thing is I'm trying to expose more about the war on drugs in my books. I've got an entire war on drugs series, and you, Joe, as well. If you think that the time is right to get your story out as a book, I think that would be a good goal that we could both collaborate on.
Well, I want to say, first of all, I really do appreciate that, Shaun. When the time does come, believe me, I will be in contact saying, Shaun, I got it. The #1 bestseller from old Joe Guerrero, After Prison Show, The Untold, Too Real for YouTube, full story. Something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure.
With Peaches on the cover.
Peaches, punk tattoo guy, delicious. It's going to be the whole collaboration, the whole After Prison Show collaboration right there.
Yeah.
But look, Shaun, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, man. I want to say, again, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Again, your story is just absolutely unbelievable with everything you've been through and everything that you've been doing with the blog, with the books, the TV shows, the talks. I'm going to include links as well for where everybody can come to find the blog and everything else that I just mentioned. But as I wrap this up, is there anything that you would like to say as some final words for this?
Oh, I really appreciate that, Joe. And, I've been driving around listening to After Prison Show. I hope I can get back on to give you some of my most shocking stories. And before we go, the thing that made me laugh the most After Prison Show was your impression of CB and how he wore his beanie. So if you have me back on, I'd appreciate it if you do another impression of old CB and how he wore his beanie.
I got the beanie right over here. Hey, Cody, throw me the beanie. It's right back here. I never saw a guy who would wear a hat like this. There's a lot of different ways you can wear something like this. But for the love of God, this guy just had to be so different that he would put that beanie on just like that. Hey, Ernie, let me get a shot of coffee, Ernie. He had to walk too because his leg was kind of messed up. He was an older guy. Ernie, you got some coffee? Oh, CB, Ernie and CB, one of the craziest old men fights I ever saw while I was locked up. And just saying that, Shaun, I can imagine you got some pretty crazy stories as well. And I want to stay in contact with you because with the fact that you have your YouTube channel as well, I'll include information on that here too. You definitely got to tell some of your crazy stories as well, man.
That'd be great. Appreciate it, man. Cheers from London.
Hey, cheers from VA, from the good old US of A. Look, Shaun, again, thank you so much, man, for taking the time to be with us. And I look forward to talking to you again real soon, man.
All right, Joe, you take care of yourself, brother.
Hey, look, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and if you did so, there's links for how you can get in contact with Shaun and all of the awesome things that he's been doing since being released. As always, until next time, enjoy life, the free world, never take a moment for granted, and make the most of every day.